Hey, get Brocked here. I've done a couple videos recently about Warfare 2 and Warfare 2 turrets specifically, and to a degree they were somewhat negative, more criticisms versus just raw negativity. There is a lot of potential there. But as I mentioned, Warfare 2 has actually brought a lot of upsides. Not only is the new turret system, right, subsystems, the ability to lock, all that really useful for not just vanilla turrets, but the entire turret framework as a whole. However, today we're going to really talk about one of the complexities brought by Warfare 2 that is a complexity, but increases it so in a satisfying way, right? Not all complexity is good, but when it adds nuance and stuff that makes you think about how you design your ship, that is really important. And one of the things Space Engineers has been lacking sorely throughout its life cycle, right? Reasons to do things other than make gun bricks. As the title implies, one of the biggest change brought is the Warfare 2 magazine racking system. What exactly is this for those that are not aware? Well, historically, when you shoot an explosive with a high energy source, like a flame, like an explosive, like a chemical explosion, even kinetic energy, will typically be enough to set this charge off. And because you're carrying a lot of explosives with you, because only a small percentage of that is used in a gun at any given time, and that gun needs to be able to kill other ships, you essentially have bombs aboard your ship in the form of areas where you store these explosives for your guns, or even your propellant. These locations are typically called magazines. Magazines are generally localized such that you can separate them for the rest of your ship, to avoid sparks, moisture, or even just protect them from incoming fire. Historically, this has worked fairly well, though there's tons of notable exceptions where a magazine system has failed. We look at Jutland with the preloading and leaving the doors open. Jutland's a World War I battle where a lot of British ships just went poof when their magazines essentially racked, which is what we're getting into today. You have other ships, man, it's the Brits always, huh? Where the Hood, for example, that's one of probably the most famous one, where she gets magazine racked, and essentially an extremely survivable ship that could hypothetically take constant fire for upwards of half a day almost, essentially died instantaneously when the magazine got hit and the ship went. Warfare 2 has attempted to integrate mechanism in such that if you hit an explosive or a box containing explosives, that thing can go boom. This sort of existed in the past. Shells can detonate, but A, it wasn't a very large detonation, and B, because the shells don't actually exist in a cargo container until the cargo container is destroyed, it was sort of a 1-2 requirement where you had to destroy the cargo container and then immediately hit it with a second explosive to cause the guts to explode, which is very hard to do because you usually hit it, it breaks, the stuff spews out, and because the ship is moving, all the stuff gets scattered to the wind and nothing really happens. And like I said, the explosions were really small. Now you can hit a magazine with stuff inside of it and it all goes instantaneously. This means there are new design considerations to avoid exactly this from ruining your ship. And today we're going to go into some designs where this is done poorly and mitigating factors to get around it. Before I get started real quick, because people like to hyperanalyze everything I show, and that's a good thing, right? It's cool, it's good for the discussion, but it's good to get ahead of it. These ships you're about to see are a product of the time they were built. Some of these were not built recently, and they're also products of the Outlands meta. Outlands is my PvP/roleplay server, and we make a series for it. You can go watch it. It's basically all I put out on this channel aside from these videos. And yeah, there are some factors that make these ships not ideal for something you might design or won't make sense for you. Why? Because Outlands has rules and limitations. So while some of the key components or subcomponents of these ships might not make any sense to you, they make sense for us, and the big picture stuff I'm talking about will make sense for you, and it will absolutely. This is one of the really early KE, Khan's Enclave ships that was present in this series. It is, admittedly, a tick box with a fair amount of small thrusters. And this speaks to this faction's utter desire and reliance on mobility. But these ships have a lot more capability below the surface that is often neglected because everyone's staring at the thrusters. And we'll get into more pretty con ships. Sorry, Maverick, it is a tick. So today we're going to primarily be focusing on the magazine thing and really what drives the design process around making a ship less susceptible to magazine racking. You'll notice a lot of different subsystems in these ships, cool tricks, PvP stuff. I want to avoid naming them by name because I'm already showing off the interior of these ships and I don't want to give away all of these guys' trade secrets. They've been gracious enough to allow me to show these ships in the first place. This is an early design for Outlands. You can see a number of features at play here, but we'll talk about the all-or-nothing approach of the vital components. For the record, this is the bridge. You can see how it's designed to avoid splash damage, but we're looking at the all-or-nothing core components of this ship initially. This is an example of what a lot of factions went for, specifically the KE. I believe the other two factions went for a very spread out approach with all three subcomponents, the magazine, the power, and the propulsion being separated throughout the ship. This is an all or nothing approach. Historically, all or nothing approaches are actually very common, where you typically more in armor schemes where you only have heavy armor in a very vital place. Everywhere else is just basically no armor, because the logic is if you can't stop the most prevalent shell, then there's no point in trying to stop secondaries. It's a very vague explanation of all or nothing, but a similar case is the case here. By localizing everything to a very small cross-sectional area of the ship, maybe only 20% or less, the likelihood that a shell is actually hitting near this area is drastically reduced. Thus, this ship is going to be nearly 100% functional right up until the second something comes in here, and then it goes to zero. And for destroyers, this is really useful because you're going to go hard and you're going to go fast with these destroyers, and you want them to be fighting at maximum potential right up until they die. Having a dispersed system is useful to keep the destroyer in the fight for longer, but because these are destroyers with limited subsystems and redundancies, once you lose your hydrogen, the ship is functionally dead. Yes, it can keep going for a little bit longer, but the effectiveness just falls off a roof. It's not a 1/3 slash, it's close to a 60%, 70% slash in performance. Similarly, if you lose the magazine on a destroyer, there is not much redundancy in terms of ammunition, such that the ship can continue fighting. However, this design offers some serious problems once Warfare 2 came about. You can see the magazine is located in the same room as all of these systems, and that kind of spelt the death knell of this all-or-nothing design philosophy. It was incredibly effective. However, in the past, when the core was breached and it became taking weapon fire, you still had to destroy all of these subsystems. Now, however, especially with the close proximity of this magazine to the thruster, well, you could probably see what it's about to happen. If you can't, let me demo it. This is a admittedly oversized weapon. Like, no destroyer is really going to be surviving capital grade weaponry for very long, but this is just to expedite. In a battle, this would take a little longer, but let's demo it. And there you have it. And taking a view into our little ship, many of the subsystems are still around, but you can see the destruction of the magazine took out a lot of very important things. One of the hydrogen tanks is gone. The magazine is completely gone, and a lot of vital systems in this area are gone. And in a single shot, this ship is functionally out of the fight, because you have to realize, in reality, the ship is constantly taking fire, so most of the ship is already damaged, and a single shell that lands in this area and is able to defeat the armor. Once again, we used an overpowered weapon for an underpowered ship, or an undersized ship, but it demonstrates the idea without me having to shoot it with, a missile launcher for like 30 seconds or whatever. So what do we do? Well, step one is obviously the magazine's got to go. How do you replace the concept of the magazine? You need ammo. Well, the initial stopgap is simply move the magazines to the turrets. This is the instantaneous solution that was proposed to stay, in the game. And, it works fairly well. Because you now have a magazine below the turret, When the turret dies, the magazine is generally going to go with it. If you destroy the magazine, you're probably already going to destroy the turret, and the damage is localized to the surface away from your critical systems. All is hunky-dory. Yeah, this works fairly well. It also has the added benefit of being somewhat immune to, well, conveyor severing, which is a very large concern of ships, right? As the battle goes on, you might have designed your ship very well. However, you're going to lose conveyors. It just is the nature of battle as your ship gets atrophied away. Losing conveyors is a very easy way to disable a ship because you basically sever the line, guns run out of ammo, and they can't get ammo from the main source of ammunition. This kind of mitigates that. However, as you imagine, this has downsides. Because these are fairly small containers, you will burn through your supply of ammo fairly quickly. We'll put more containers under the guns, which is a thing, 2 containers instead of 1. But you can see where this is going. 2 containers is also not that much, and you will quickly get to the point where you essentially just put large magazines below all your turrets, and, well, that's no good either, especially since you have a lot of turrets. And now you've just covered your ship in nitroglycerin. That brings us to our next ship, the Nessie. Great ship, by the way. Like, visually, this is a very distinctive ship. Very cool. I like it. As you can see, sometimes ships can look good and be effective too, though debatably this was built around a concept that doesn't really function as well as people might imagine in practice, and you'll see what I mean in a second, because thin ships are inherently dangerous, because you'll more often than not see the entire front section of your ship split off, for example. But it's still a very effective ship and has a lot of kills racked up. So as you can see, the whole point of the nose section was to move decoy blocks away from the center of the ship. This kind of worked pre-Warfare, but as an aside, in Warfare 2, decoys are different in how they work, and they must be fairly close to important systems, so something like this wouldn't work too well. So if you target core systems, these decoys are way too far away to actually do much of anything. Now, this kind of represents the starting steps of innovation. As I mentioned, the big step was let's move away as much ammo out of the core as possible and move it towards the guns. This is a stopgap measure, once again. You have a core, a magazine, but this time we've moved as much ammunition out of the magazine as possible. There's not very much in there. And we've moved as much ammo into the turrets via this cargo system. But as mentioned, these cargo systems is not enough to keep you in the fight. You need a secondary source of ammunition somewhere to keep these things filled for as long as possible until your conveyor line gets severed. So that's what happens here. You have a reduced loaded magazine, and you have the turrets with their own source of ammunition, thus, removing the amount of boom in a specific area. We still have the all or nothing approach, but hopefully with a reduced payload, maybe we won't have as many issues. Question mark? Well, in practice, this might work, but there is a secondary issue you have to contend with these sub-magazines as we've described them. Looking at the complete ship, you can kind of see what's going on here. However, you've probably guessed it by now. Because our turrets are so close together, we've essentially created a super magazine. Not only is there a large amount of ammunition stored in a relatively small area, but they're staggered in such a fashion that these are going to chain. Let's see it in practice. And you can see the damage is whatever, right? This is light armor. This is to be expected. Nothing really of importance is lost. And when the ship is moving, that splash damage is actually more distributed. But you can see what happened here. The magazine actually survived. That's a first. But as you can see, the explosive payload of 2 semi-direct hits was enough to detonate one magazine, which caused the next magazine to detonate, which caused the next magazine to detonate. And did we wipe out the bridge? We actually didn't wipe out the bridge. So this was we'll call it a lucky impact in terms of what could have happened. We could have very well lost the entire ship in these 2 400 mil shots. Now it's worth noting, While these are capital grade weapons, destroyers are allowed to have one of them, and that was 2 shots. And remember, fights go on for about 2 minutes to 3 minutes of constant action. So the likelihood that you're going to hit a center mass shot on the top or bottom of the ship, right, is not unlikely. And this was basically catastrophic, while this one was considered more lucky than most shots, right, in that it didn't detonate the magazine and the bridge survived. You can see the ship is now incredibly in a scary spot. The bridge is desperately exposed, and the magazine, hydrogen, and important components are also very much exposed. Next up on the list is the Tashkent. I don't know. This ship right here, very sexy ship, by the way. I really like this ship. It kind of shows that, greebling is great, but this is a good example of minimal greebling for a very striking design. In general, I love a lot of the KE ships. And as you can see, they have a very animalistic theme for a lot of their ships. This one's got a mouth. I think Gary, it's not this ship specifically, the mouth can actually articulate. But, slide aside. So let's look at this ship. This is another evolution or attempt to mitigate the issues caused by Warfare 2, and actually some of the issues that weren't even caused by Warfare 2, just issues from PvP in general. This is another magazine localization design, right, where everything is mostly close together. But as you can see on this one, it's actually fairly armored in the sense that they're in different sections. Now at this point, it's worth noting, if you have noticed the usage of blast door blocks, let's put it out there right now. Blast door blocks in vanilla have basically the same value as heavy armor, but they also have a very unique feature in that they don't deform. And deform causes secondary damage. If you deform into a block, you poof that block. Especially if you are connected to said block. We did do a slight change on Outlands, and we adjusted the value of these to have the same value as light armor, but because destroyers in our series are only allowed to have light armor, these function well in the sense that they don't deform and are basically the best way to armor something short of putting a giant thruster in front of it. This is quite useful in the sense that this is an iterative design. This has upsides and downsides. We're no longer in the all or nothing approach, right? But that's very useful because let's say the reactor gets damaged from, let's say we're coming in at a 45-degree angle back, we have shells that have penetrated through and it's continuing to take hits. We're gonna lose the reactor. However, the incoming shells are not at risk of splashing over into our hydrogen and taking out our propulsion system, or our reactor, or our magazine. And the same applies in reverse. This is mostly before Warfare 2. Radial explosion, and that was a very lightly loaded magazine. But as you can see, the armored subcomponents did protect large sections of the ship, right? The hydrogen tank was not lost. Granted, that was partially because the jump drive acted as a shielding, but this ship is still functional in the sense that it has hydrogen and a reactor left. It's not functional in the sense that it's split in half, but this gives you an idea of how spacing armor, kind of like a World War II or even modern design armored magazine that's separated from other vital components, can go a long way to protect your ship in terms of durability. Cool. Let's go to the final design. All right, we are now on the final design right here. This is one of the more popular designs the KE have used. Once again, let's go with that shark mouth. I love it. But I think this one even has an eye, right? Yeah. Very cool ship design. Once again, really utilizing the thruster banks as a protective area and just raw stuff to protect the core of the ship. Very cool design. Going into the ship, let's take a look at it. This kind of brings us to the final evolution where we're at right now after about 2 weeks of doing, well, Warfare 2 modified Outlands. What's the difference? Well, you can see it. For starters, let's do an aside. This is a cruiser, but you can see how these designs would be applied to a destroyer and other type ships. We saw a lot of it in the destroyer variant of the ship with the isolated chambers, so to speak, of stuff. But you'll notice something. There is no magazine anymore. It's been completely removed. we still have that innovation that was designed day one of putting thrusters and their little magazines directly below them, right? Cargo container. Boom. This has a very useful effect of, well, keeping the gun going no matter what, even if your conveyor line gets severed. As you can see, here's another innovation. We have a force sorter that pushes stuff into the magazine such that the magazine stays full, because the battle's going to go on, the gun's going to want to pull from the magazine directly below it. By the time your conveyor line gets severed, well, damn, there's no ammo left in that, and it's pulling from magazines deeper in the ship. However, if you force sort into the magazine, that keeps that full at all times, such that when the conveyor gets severed, such that you have a minor magazine detonation elsewhere in the ship, you're not screwed. These guns can still keep going to the moment they're destroyed or they deplete their own source of magazine, which generally means the battle is going on way too long and something is going badly wrong. However, you'll also notice the second innovation, and at this point, the final innovation. Because it's a cruiser, there is an expectation of being able to chug on and on and on as vital systems get destroyed and you switch to secondary systems, unlike a destroyer, which doesn't really have room for large secondary systems beyond like a basic power bank and maybe a small hydrogen tank. We have those small magazines below each turret, but we also see clusterings of mini magazines throughout the ships. They also are conveniently placed to act as conveyor junctions because, well, they can do that. But you can see magazines throughout the ship. This has a number of benefits. Number one, the magazine isn't located in a central location, because even with a big ship like this cruiser, you take enough fire to punch through to the magazine. If that magazine goes, even if it's underloaded, which is the typical meta that's going on right now, underload your magazines, put the rest of the ammo near the turrets, you're still going to blow a massive hole in the side of your ship, and that may be enough to take you out of the fight. However, if you keep the explosive payload of your magazine low, and you spread it out throughout the ship, sure, a single detonation might do damage, but that section of the ship is already taking catastrophic damage to get to the magazine, the mini magazine, and that extra explosion won't matter nearly as much as a large magazine is described. So you get the benefits of having a localized magazine to the turret. You get the benefit of a large magazine centralized on the ship, but now because it's spread out, you don't have the downsides of that magazine. Are there downsides to this system? Oh yeah, absolutely. What if you miss and hit this instead of, the thruster? Well, the thruster's probably doomed, right? You hit this magazine, you're gonna kill the thruster. But at the end of the day, PvP is about compromises. And what's our goal here? Survivability, right? We're removing as many lights out mechanics from the ship as possible such that the ship can have endurance. And losing small systems is far better than having a button essentially on your ship that kills your ship, right? Because even if you might lose the ship, like combat effectiveness wise, you can still recover the ship and bring it home. But if you have a magazine, well, there is a very real potential that there won't be a ship to bring home, even if you win or lose the battle. Let's demo this guy and then wrap it up. So let's say a single clustering of shells makes it through, and we get to that thruster I mentioned, that magazine I mentioned before. Ouch! That did a lot of damage, right? I mean, we hit a central component of the ship, but we lost our magazine right here. The explosion, as I just heard a secondary go off, as I said, it was enough to chain over to the thruster pack, but that wasn't a very large explosion. This thruster survived, right? And this is redundantly conveyed on the other half of the ship. You don't see it here. Let's hit another conveyor system, or another magazine. Once again, a lot of local damage, and that is the downside, right? We just did more damage than we otherwise would have. But that section of the ship is still here because that magazine wasn't as heavily loaded. Let's hit a big clustering. Those were two mini magazines next to each other. Group of two and a group of two. But look at that. We survived once again. Let's test out the effectiveness of this shielded area. This shielded area. let's hit the hydrogen tank below the CIC. Wait for the smoke to clear. So this was actually, in this case, not enough to protect the reactor, surprisingly, but that was a very close call. I'm going to guess this is at about 60%. Oh, I fucked up. That was about 60%. There's an invisible block in front of me because God bless space engineers. But you can see this thing almost survived. And that was a capital grade weapon. Functionally in PvP, when shells start getting through to the cores, it's going to be one shell, a 220 mil, some 43 fire more realistically, and you can see how this almost survived a complete destruction of the hydrogen tank. So yeah, I then got a little rambly near the end, but I think you get the idea. Ships are a lot of subcomponents and a lot of little ideas that come together to create a thing that's better than the sum of the parts, right? And you can kind of see the evolution going here. Very big thanks for the KE for allowing me to use their ships for these designs. Their ships are really cool visually, really cool functionally, and really have a lot of smart ideas behind their design. We only touched on one aspect here today, and if you're smart and if you've noticed this, you'll see a lot of small other things that make these ships quite potent. So much so that some rules are being devised to indirectly nerf them come Season 3. But for now, good stuff. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. This is me actually in post. You can probably tell I sound a bit different. Didn't realize until the end that Windows 11 reset all my audio settings because it likes doing that for whatever reason. No idea why. But hopefully the audio distortion wasn't too bad. It got pretty badly corrupted. Regardless, thanks for watching. I'll have it fixed for future videos. I know to look for it now. If any of this was interesting to you, consider subscribing. I'm going to be doing more videos like this, but I also do Outlands, which is the series that a lot of these ships are based off of, which is a PvP meets machinima meets a role-playing server-esque thing. Consider checking it out. Regardless, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys around.